Okay, uh, we're live streaming. Tell me when to begin. Okay, we're ready. All right. So, Elvis, it's you and I until the others come in. Okay. Welcome to those who are watching from home. And we are on lesson number 8 of our quarterly, with the title being Planning for Success. This whole quarter has been about managing for the master until he comes. And we've gone through in previous lessons such things as financial management, let's see, what are some of the others? Um, Indebtedness, following godly counsel on that, and tithe and offerings, and that it was not a direction that God gave the Israelites just for the Jews regarding tithe and offering. And if you remember correctly, the after the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve were dispatched from the Garden of Eden, God gave even more specific instructions regarding tithe and offering. And remember that with Cain and Abel, with Adam and Eve and subsequent generations, they were to give a tenth of their produce, a tenth if they had a business. Whatever the profit was, they were to give a tenth of that from the top and not net. And with produce and other farm goods, it was still a 10% from the top first harvest. And we recognize that as the story develops in Genesis, Cain, right, didn't want to do that. You know, he was mad at God about his parents being kicked out of the garden. He didn't understand or want to understand the necessity of this remembrance in the form of tithe and offerings. And in addition to giving the tenth off of whatever the produce was, they were to sacrifice the best lamb, not anything that was scarred. And the meaning behind that was so that they would always be in remembrance that salvation for humanity has occurred. The price in the form of Jesus Christ would ultimately down the centuries be demonstrated. And it was to keep them in remembrance of that deliverance. And the tithe and offering keep them in remembrance that God gave them and all he required of them to produce faith, I think, in part. And in our modern times is to help facilitate the spread of the gospel throughout the world and the management of local churches. And so now we're down to this aspect of our lives of planning for success. Now, Elvis, I'm going to ask you a direct question. How did your family instruct you to prepare for a successful life?
Yeah, good morning and happy Sabbath. I think
you.
this is a good question. I was taught to do well in school, to get a good job. But lately, I realized that I would not teach my children the same message because it was focusing on learning to be employed. I think we can change it from learning to be an employer, to be creative and have your own business. So I think it's just a change in the mindset. You know, growing up it was you need to be educated, you need to do this in order to get a good job.
Yeah.
However, I think we can be more open to tell our children, learn so you can be creative, so that you can be the employer, you can be the one who's innovative and starting something new.
Yes. And in fact, it's interesting how things change from generation to generation, and things in particular with regards to preparing for success. What is success? And how is it manifested? And in my upbringing, um, and I think because of the role modeling from previous generations did not have an education. And so, just pretty much like it is now, but back then, I'm saying in the 20s and 30s and the late 1900s, success and wealth were controlled by less than 1% of the population. And there was a decided effort to not let too many people get a piece of that successful pie, which would include wealth, ownership, and that sort of thing. But yet, on the other hand, a lot of the well known entities in this country was developed by men with limited learning. Carnegie was one of those people. Carnegie, who originally was from Scotland, immigrated here, Porous Joe's turkey, as the expression goes, with nothing. Somehow or other, he managed to get a hold of the idea that he could make something out of steel, and all of that grew. The Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, the senior, as I refer to old man Vanderbilt, I believe he started cruise lines, shipping lines, and got the monopoly on that for a long time and made a tremendous amount of money. Then there were the Roosevelts. You know, not all of them were educated. So somewhere along the way, it became the mantra that we must get an education. So a lot of these people who had acquired a tremendous amount of wealth, and at that time didn't have to pay federal or state taxes. And then when that was changed, then they started donating money towards building educational institutions and various other kinds of institutions. And somehow or other, it became you had to get an education if you were going to get a good job. And I must say that was true for me. I dare say that if I hadn't been given the opportunity as well as the money to go to college, I don't know where I'd be now. But the other aspect of this planning for success, I think for that time it was appropriate because the opportunities were extremely limited. But now we've learned, and I have learned, that there were some kids that I went to school with in college whose families planned their career paths because they wanted them to be successful. And it seemed as though that career path was based on whatever mother or daddy's career or profession was. And I have since learned for myself, and my career path was planned too. But I had other interests, but I didn't realize what those interests were until I became an adult and had gotten the education and could make my own money. And then, as my mother would say, you girls are going to become nurses, and then when you graduate and start making your own money, then you can choose whatever else you want to do at your own expense. So anyway, that was the upbringing for me. But we see, I wonder then, Elvis, how much, if any, is there a difference between how we want to instruct in planning success biblically or spiritually versus how we were prepared for success? What's the difference now? And also in ancient times, you know, the ancient people, did they do the same thing as our parents in terms of preparing their kids and planning their success or career routes?
I think the key verse I can use to respond to your question is seek ye first
Yeah.
the kingdom of God, and then all the other things will be added. And I think that is an important step for us to keep that first, because I've heard several pastors' story. They never had a dream, never had an ambition to become a pastor, but somewhere along their path, God called them. And I'm sure it is the same for others. Once you put God first, He can direct your path.
You're right. But how many of us know to do that at first, as parents or either as siblings? Because we're looking at what success consists of in a non spiritual light. You know? Not everybody is cut out to be a pastor, not everybody is cut out to do missionary work. So we look to other people and things, and sometimes within ourselves, to decide what kind of career, and we don't think about seeking God first or even asking God.
I remember in high school, when I was in ninth grade, we did probably 13 to 14 subjects. And then based on your performance in those subjects, it determined your future studies. So it could be the sciences, the business subjects, the engineering, and that helped the teachers to guide you along your path based on your strength in that particular ninth grade. So there are also indicators that you can use to identify your strength in determining your career path.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. There are some strength tests and etc.
I wanted to become a doctor. However, I could not get along well with the sciences, particularly physics. And I was doing better with the business subjects. So that's how I ended up being a chartered accountant, based on the strength that was identified from high school.
Okay.
It was more to the business subject and not to the sciences.
Okay. You know, I think in some cultures now, and I'm thinking of what I think I've understood from some of the Africans in our church that I know are outside of our church who have indicated that as they go through what we would call elementary or secondary education, sort of their career paths would determine on the strength and success of tests that they pass, how well they excel, because many of them would have their college education paid by the state, and they would be sent elsewhere. But with the caveat, if you go abroad to study, you coming back here, back home to work and contribute and pay us back for helping you through college. And I definitely agree. Nellie, what are you looking for? Microphones? Elvis has them. So Sheila and Pastor Bratworth, welcome. And we were discussing the difference in planning for a successful life, and we're looking at career paths right now. How we were prepared for that growing up versus is it any different than what the ancients did with their kids? And what is the difference with now? How are we preparing our kids, our children, our young adults for success? Good morning, sir. Come on in. We're having Sabbath School, and welcome. So join us. And if you sit next to Nellie there, you can share the microphone. And we're just sort of getting started. What is your name?
My name is Groom.
Rome?
Yeah.
Oh, Rome.
Yeah.
Welcome. I'll remember that. Rome, okay. So anyway, in planning for success, Sheila, what was your experience growing up? How did your parents tell you or prepare you, or did they make a career choice for you?
I kind of think they did.
Yeah.
So, as you know, I have a restaurant, right? A soul food restaurant. And never in my wildest dream did I ever thought that one day I would be owning a restaurant and cooking for many people that would enjoy my food. But it came, my mother came to me when I was probably about 14, 15 years old. And she told me she had to leave the home to work outside the home. My father had got real ill. You know, he was the main provider for our home. So she was always a stay-at-home mom and cooked. But when he got really ill and couldn't do it anymore, She then had to go to school, get a job, and I was the only girl that was left in the home with two brothers under me, one older than me, and my dad. And with her being gone all day, my job was to come home from school, do my homework, and cook. So one day when she told me, she said, well, you're going to be cooking for the family. So my answer was, well, Mom, I don't know how to cook because I really didn't. I mean, my sister, she's 2 years older than me, so she did all the cooking. I was more like your outside tomboy, sports, school. That was me. So when she brought it to me, you can imagine how inferior it was to me because I really didn't. But she said, yeah, well, you watch me cook all these years. You gonna come here every day after school and you will cook. And I promise you, all I did, because she raised us in church, and all I did one day, I said, God, I don't know what I'm doing, but just please just help me. And every day I came home, and I just don't know how it happened, but I think I eventually just kind of fell in love with cooking. One is because I wanted to impress my mom. Secondly, it became a gift that I didn't know I had. And then as I got older and I cooked more and people would come to our home and they would always just brag how good the food was, and sometimes you don't know you have a gift until people keep reminding you like, girl, this food is good. So when we did open it up, people from all over, it's like, we really enjoy your food. But the thing is, I think my mom, you're right, she never seen this day. She passed away, so she don't have no idea that I went that route. My thing was hair. I went to school to be a hair cosmetologist, and so I love doing hair. But there was another gift that God outside of that gave me that it would prepare me for this time in my life. And my children, what they did is they watched me work, all my life. I was never a lazy woman, so they see me get up and go every day. My children are the same way. My daughter Sharita is working on her doctorate. She's going to be a principal. And my son, he works. He's managing some kind of senior citizen home. But anyway, they watch me work all my life. So with even our stepson, Audrey, he works. So everybody who was in our household, that's what they saw us do. Me work, he work. So success sometimes is kids not even having to tell them this is what you have to do. They'll watch you. So I think the examples of your children just watching you as they come up and see, well, money just don't grow off of trees. Like I would tell them, you have to work to earn it, and they have done that. So I think success in teaching our children by example too, and setting it like I told my kids, education, go to school. Even if if you didn't go to college, just get your high school diploma if that's what it takes, but let's push you through the door with that. And I think that success starts at home with kids sometimes just watching us.
I think that's a very good explanation, Sheila.
Yeah.
Very, very good. Elvis had talked about how he was influenced to be successful and what his changes would be now in raising his children. So Nellie, I'm going to come to you. How did your parents prepare you or instruct you for future success? Did you make a decision about what kind of career path you wanted, or did your parents make a decision for you?
My father's plan was that his 3 daughters would go to college, move away. His son would get the farm. His son would not need college, and it would be fair because he wouldn't pay for any college for him. That was his plan. I went to community college first because I didn't really want to move away from home till I had to. My sisters went to Maplewood, but I read the rules and said no. I don't know. I wasn't rebellious. I just didn't like the sound of them. But then when I went to community college, I just took general stuff. And then I went to Union College. My sister was there a year before me, working on an elementary education degree. And I worked on an English and a combination with media or library science. And the idea was that in Adventist schools, oftentimes you do partly English and partly the library. they didn't tell me anything, but I always had my nose in a book when they were doing their cooking and sewing and useful things. I had my nose in a book usually. So it was a logical thing for me to want to live with the books. And my younger sister, she went into nursing in the community college and got her RN degree. She's making a lot more money than I ever made in my life. She's just now retired after 50 years, and she's never had a problem getting a job. And my mother had wished she could have been an RN, but in service they only let her be a nurse aide when she went in the WACs. And so Esther kind of fulfilled her dream for her. My older sister did go into elementary education for years in Adventist church schools, and then after that, she married this man and went into making custom kitchen cabinets, and she's retired from that now.
So essentially, then it sounds like that you chose your own career path as opposed to having your parents to do so for you. And
Except for the farm and Dan. I don't know that he necessarily chose that. I think Dad kind of
Yeah.
chose that.
But
Keep it
there's
in the
a matter
Harris
of
name and run the
inheritance
farm.
involved in that and keeping the farm in the family, right?
That's
you
it.
girls weren't going to do it.
Yeah.
And your husband certainly weren't going to do it. So it fell to the boy probably by default in some sense. Rome, what we're talking about is choosing careers and how we came about doing that and looking at that from a biblical perspective. So if you look on the quarterly that Nellie has, you see the title, Planning for Success. And none of us just fall into a career unless you're extremely fortunate to do so. So ideally, you know, I think God's intent for us was to always consult him in prayer, study. Somehow he would be able to guide us if we were willing for that. And then there's been times in our history, and still is, in which kids choose to take a career based on how much money is going to be made. Now, when I was in nurses training, I liked nursing, but eventually I realized I should have been a doctor. So when I got out of nursing school, making money for the first time in my life, I soon forgot about medicine and went on to, you know, become successful as a nurse. Yes, Pastor Bradworth. I can hardly hear you. You have the mic on?
Just one.
Yeah.
Okay, the lesson points out two individuals, Joseph and John the Baptist, and they asked about success and spoke about success sometimes is what you determine it to be. Was Joseph successful, and was John the Baptist, who they killed, was he successful?
So are you asking the class the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know.
My response to that, and I'll repeat the question as I understood it, in terms of success, was Joseph, who was the son of Jacob, was he successful?
Yes.
And was John the Baptist successful? Yes. And John the Baptist lost his head. But yes, they were both successful. And I think also in these two characters' lives, we can see if we read and study about their lives from the Bible and other adjunct material. These two men Joseph asked God to lead him, guide him. I mean, this is the man who was sold as a slave by his brothers, never to be seen by his family again until the famine occurred, and everybody had to go down to Egypt to be fed, because Egypt at that time was the breadbasket of the then known world. So he goes there as a 17-year-old, already despised by the Egyptians. They didn't care for Semites. And somehow he's bought by the chief of police, I believe that's what it's been translated as, Potiphar. And Potiphar hires him to manage his household. Now look at the circumstances in which his skills are developed. Now I suspect he knew nothing about math and managing a house or managing wealth. Potiphar had all of that and a huge staff. So Joseph continued to pray and ask God to guide him. He didn't want to stay there, but God did not make provisions for him to leave Egypt. He had broader plans for him. So consequently, Joseph becomes the head financially of Potiphar's household, to the extent that this Egyptian chief of kings, or not kings, but police, so to speak, didn't have to worry about what was in the house, if the bills were paid, if the guy was being honest. But with integrity, honesty, his commitment to God, and his daily prayers for guidance, look at the skills that were developed in him. Now, in between all of that, the poor kid ends up in jail too, because the man's wife accuses him of raping her. He goes to jail. He's there for a couple of years. His skills are recognized. He's treated well. And for 2 years, he's in jail for something that he didn't do. Ultimately, we know from Bible history that he was released from jail and ultimately ended up being, what was it, the premier of Egypt, second to the Pharaoh of Egypt. And look at the broader success of those difficult times he went through. God used him to manage, allocate, prepare for a drought that lasted for 7 years. And it saved a lot of people, including his own family who sold him into slavery. So yes, he was successful, but he allowed himself to be trained and guided by God. In the case of John the Baptist, yeah. I mean, if John the Baptist had refused to take the path God had designed for him, sure, God could have replaced him with somebody else. But John saw the benefit, and he had been trained from childhood. And so when Sheila mentioned, sometimes our kids recognize and can observe what we're doing, and that can help them to make their choices and etc. Others of us may have to be guided into it, and we are influenced by other things. But I'd like to suggest that even if we are in a career that we didn't choose for ourselves, it's still important to ask God to guide you through it. Because that may be where he wants you to be. And then to always acknowledge that you're where you are. God knows that you're there. He may have intended for you to be there, and maybe not. But as my grandparents used to say, make the best of it. You never know what's around the corner for you. So moving on. So does that answer your question? Okay. So Elvis brought up something, and this was noted on Sunday's page. First things first. And first things first was to seek God and finish the rest of it, Elvis. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all the rest will be added to you. Now, for some of us in this modern time, some of us are not going to buy that. I don't care if you consider yourself a Christian or not, because we often want to do what we want to do. But the reality is that I believe it to be true. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and ask him to teach you to listen, to pray, and be willing to have your plans altered, because he knows what's going on in the background of all of our lives. He knows, I believe, what is best for us. A lot of us, including me, would have stayed out of a lot of trouble if I had believed that early on. So moving on. Any comments from anybody on Monday or Tuesday's headings? The blessing of work, the earning years. Comments? Anyone?
Could I just ask another question?
Sure.
speaking about success, I'm thinking about more in recent time, the period of our church. We have Hazen Foss, whom God called.
Repeat that again. We have who? We.
Hazen Foss. That was the guy that was called before Ellen G. White
Oh, okay.
to prophesy, who did not prophesy and did not do what he was called to do, and went out and died in shame and disgrace. And then you had Ellen White, who was called and obeyed her call. In the Christian context, if you are called to do something and you do not do what you were called to do, but you might be, no, I don't want to use that word, but you might achieve financial stability or acclaim by the world, but in terms of God's call, you did not. Is that person successful?
Well, you know, I think only God knows the minds of all of us. Now, in terms of being successful or not, what is it that they went out to do? And were they paying attention to God, you know, and leading them? I dare say that there are some things God asked me to do I didn't do. But am I successful? I think I am. But I think God circles back to try and get you again, maybe to do something else, you know? So I would hesitate to suggest that, that's my phone, I'm sorry. I would hesitate to just flat out say that because I refuse some earlier directions of God, I am not successful at what I'm doing. Anybody else's thought?
I think, you know what, not think, but we serve a merciful God. You know, God made us. He knows us. You know, and many times that I know, I can recall many times he spoke to me, you know, and being hard-headed, you know, not listening, following after his leading. Like you say, it gets us in a ball of trouble. You know, we end up repeating things, going around a big, huge circle like the children of Israel, you know, round and around and around and around until we get it. Then all of a sudden we have this like, epiphany. Oh my God, I wish I had done this so long ago when you had brought it to me. How hard-headed. But again, because God is so merciful to us, you know, even though it sets us back, you know, even his mercy will guide us back to where he wants us to be, where we originally should have been. But it's the time, space that you lost, you know. Some of us lose time and space of the things that we were called to do. And it was an old saying that if you pass the test the first time, you don't have to repeat it, you know. But most of us who flunk the test in God's sight, we have to repeat it until we get it right, you know. But that's why I said God is so merciful, you know. Many of us that say that we love the Lord, you know, and Lord, take me, you know, wherever you want me to go, I'll go. And we'll say those things, you know. But then when he take us to some rocky mountains and some rough place, then we question him. I mean, it quite didn't mean that one, you know.
Yeah.
And again, God, because of his mercy and his love toward us, you know, we just have to, you know, heed to the calling.
Okay. Now Rhonda has a comment.
I do, because I often think about our patriots.
Put the phone to your mouth.
Okay, I often think about our brothers and sisters when we talk about the ones that's been on before us. So I think about David. And David was a man after God's own heart. That's what God said. But David messed up so many times, so many times. We can count, how many times he messed up. We know he killed Bathsheba's husband. Just so many things that he did, but yet he was still called a man after God's own heart, even though he repented. And I think we too are the same way. When God has a plan for your life, even when we deviate a little bit, the bad that we chose, he works it out for our good.
Yeah.
And not to take that lightly, but to think about God is perfect, and he know that his people are imperfect. And that when he has a plan for our lives, even though we choose the wrong thing, I think he turned it around for our good.
The other thing I'd like to say, thank you, Rhonda, but in response to your question, God gave us power of choice. So if someone else got a call prior to Mrs. White, that person rejected. Remember, Mrs. White initially rejected too, and then she came around. But the thing is that I think God respected that person's decision not to do what God wanted him to do. I think the same thing with us today, but that doesn't cut him off from still trying to communicate with us and still lead us in the best place possible. Because as I still like to say, God knows what's going on in the background. I may think I do, and I can plan for all of these contingencies, but God knows, and he may give me another chance at making a decision, yes or no, for something else to be used to his glory. So I want to move on to the blessing of work, and I'm going to combine these last few, the earning years, the years that what is the first 40 years of our lives is probably the most productive of our lives, and the blessing of work. Compare that to those who don't like to work, who may have inherited enough that they feel they don't need to work. And I'm just going to relate an experience with you. I was down in Tahiti for a while, and I met these people, American people, who had gone there as young men with $1 million, blew it all in 6 months, and they blew it on partying. But these men ultimately became some of the richest hoteliers in the South Pacific. They lied and stole to get money to build their empire. And they stole from wealthy people who'd come there on vacation, telling them they were selling stocks and building hotels. And these people would donate thousands and thousands of dollars. So the one that I knew fairly well was telling me ultimately they told the truth to all these investors. And the investors said, "Oh, we knew you were lying, but so much fun." So the crux of this story is they ultimately became very wealthy again. They all three of them stayed there on the island. And they never, ever stopped toiling. The hotels on 3 different islands, very successful. And the one that I knew worked on a farm, bought a mountain, shaved off the top, and cultivated that mountain into a huge vineyard, an experimental farm, so to speak. And I will never forget him saying, having money doesn't mean anything. You've got talent, skill, work. It does good for the bones and for the muscles. And so as I was preparing for this week and looking at this title, working, God intended for us to work. Just think of the people you may or may not know or have read about who've inherited a tremendous amount of money, never had to work. How did they spend their lives? Now, they had money managers, and for tax purposes, they probably had things invested in various charitable products to help other people. But were they physically there themselves, helping others? and one person that comes to mind is the only daughter and heir to one of the big tobacco firms. Her father died young, left her multi millions of dollars. She married 7 different times, had homes all over the globe, and died from doing nothing, being a drunkard essentially. And when she died, she had $3,000 left in her bank account. 3,000, yeah. And many of her husbands and friends often said that she was the most unhappiest person they'd ever met, but they all partied together and enjoyed her money and partying. And she never worked a day in her life because she didn't have to. So we have not only an example like that, but I still believe that God intends for some people to have wealth and use it per his directions, or use it for the good of others. And we all have power of choice. We choose how we want to use that money, and it's usually to gratify ourselves first. Other people will think about it. But nonetheless, when Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, look, they had everything at their disposal. They didn't have to work. Fruit just laying on the ground, so to speak. Your meal was always ready. But he instructed them to work. And through hard work and toiling, there would be built within them, I think, a sense of integrity, ownership, pride, and joy in working. I think the same principles apply now. I'd hate to think that I did nothing when I got up every day. I'd go crazy. Comments, anybody? Joining these two lessons together. The joy of working.
I'm wanting to think about the people in the Bible that became the heroes, sometimes became the heroes later in life.
Yeah.
Think of Moses. He didn't become the leader until after he spent 40 years in the wilderness. We would say he was ready for retirement maybe nowadays at that age, but that was when he became more useful to God, and he was more open and could be a leader himself.
I understand we have 5 minutes, so I'm going to limit comments to 2. Pastor Broderick, and then my friend Soga.
I apologize because my hearing is not as it used to be, so I'm not hearing everything. So if I don't comment on what was said, forgive me. But do we have 2 different standards for judging success? In other words, if someone works and does well according to worldly standards in terms of what we call achievement, getting a house and property and education, whatever worldly standards we attribute to success, if that person achieves those but doesn't achieve salvation, was he successful? Now I'm looking at it from a Christian point of view because that's who I am, that's what we are, and that's what we're studying, success according to a Christian. While there's another person who was very simple but satisfied. I mean, a simple life, no big house, fancy job, maybe just rode a bicycle or walked. You understand what I'm driving at? A simple person, but his soul is saved. He was saved. Or push it a little further. He might have messed up, done several things he should not have done, had things taken away from him, and he, according to society, wasn't a very exemplary person. But he was saved. He accepted Christ and was saved. Now, how do we judge those 2 individuals in terms of success?
My response to that is none of my business. Salvation is God's business. And both persons can be successful. And in terms of whether or not they accepted Christ, that's between them and God. And it's not my prerogative to judge their success based on whether they accepted God or not. Because externally, we see that both of them appear to be successful. Soga.
Um, so if God can, so success is, God created the world to work because God himself works every single day. Because he wakes us up. He rises the sun, he sets the sun, he brings the rain. He does everything to just keep the world operating. So that's really, even when he created man, he also gave them work even from day one, and named all the animals, all the fruits, all the trees, everything, and then take care of it. So that's really what God created this world to be, is for us to work and to return glory to him. And ultimately, even when we go to heaven, we will be praising him. And that's really what we're created. But while we're here, we'll need to work. And even going to the earning years, that's really, there's a productive life that we can live, but we were created to work. Thank you.
Whatever career you've chosen, whether it be 2, 3, or 4 different careers throughout your lifetime, do all to the glory of God. Give him praise for allowing you to have those talents to do it. And then to seek him continually. Because if you have 2 or 3 careers, he may decide that he wants you to move on to something else. Be available, flexible for those changes. Never forget that you are where you are because of God's grace and mercy towards me and you. It is still left up to each one of us, regardless of the career, is to recognize that what is the ultimate goal? And the ultimate goal is to serve God and humanity. And allow your life, your heart, and your passions reflect that. You know, for people who are in medicine and decide to do missionary work for the rest of their lives, or people who are in medical professions and make the decision to join various camps, to travel all over the world, to do surgeries for people who are unable to have that done where they may live. And great for them. But even so, don't forget who gave you the talent, the funds, or resources, and to remember that there are other people who deserves your service. Seek them out, if at all possible. If you're a teacher, or if you're a librarian, or if you haven't made up your mind yet just what you're going to do. And if Christianity means anything to you at all, ask God to guide you in that choice. And even if you choose not to accept God's advice, and you choose your own, you know, who knows? He may be able to turn that around to use, as Rhonda was saying, working things out for your good. I mean, the Bible is still full of characters like that as well. And so, but we all have that ultimate opportunity. God is still seeking to bring us into a relationship with him and accept the gift of salvation, because for those of us who have gone our own routes, so to speak, and have been dragged back by God, we see the difference. We know. And so we appreciate with a certain degree of passion of having been spared, our lives been spared. We can see circumstances where God intervened and how he rescued you from potential whatever to bring us to wherever, so that we still could be used. Now, we've acquired a lot of skills and a lot of whatever else along the way. God can refine all of that and use it to his good as well. So I don't have any ill feelings about not becoming a doctor. I now would prefer to be a lawyer, with the ultimate goal to be a judge. I think I'd be pretty good at that. But, so anyway, any other comments? I'm being signaled in from the back.
I'll just add something on seeking God's counsel on Thursday, and the psalmist over there is in Psalms chapter 1, just encourages us to continuously seek God and to be in God's presence all the time, because it starts with, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of the sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaves also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. And the key thing over here is, day and night we need to be seeking God's counsel. And if we delight ourselves in the law of the Lord, he will plant us wherever there is. You look at it, planted in the rivers of the water. He will nourish us always, and whatever we do, we will prosper, because we are in the sight of the Lord.
Yeah.
And God always blesses those who are in his presence.
And look, the other addition to that comment is that you have to be willing to let God teach you to submit to his choices for you. Because as I've said earlier, he knows what's going on in the background. We don't. And so if he's leading us a direction we don't want to go, we have the choice to follow that. But always seek the guidance of people who have integrity, honesty, and who seek God even for their own counsel. That would be the first choice. But see, I mean, I can say that now because I'm not in my 20s and 30s. Back then, I would have sought Bruce's counsel, and you would have sought your counsel. And if someone had crossed your path and tried to advise you, if you liked the advice, you would accept it. But this is a call for something different, to be in the presence of God, as David